The dust from the departing stagecoach settled around Amelia Carson's boots as she stood at the town limits of White Pine, Nevada, watching the man she had come to care for more than she ever thought possible prepare to ride away into territory that might swallow him whole. It was August of 1878, and the summer heat shimmered off the desert floor like liquid silver, distorting the mountains in the distance until they looked like waves frozen in time. Harrison York sat astride his sorrel mare, his weathered hat pulled low against the glare, and something in his blue eyes told her he was memorizing every detail of her face. "I suppose this is goodbye, then," Amelia said, hating how her voice wavered despite her determination to sound strong. She had been working as a seamstress in White Pine for only 6 months, having come west after her father's death left her with nothing but debts in St. Louis. The small mining town had been kind to her, and Harrison had been kinder still, always tipping his hat when he passed her shop, always finding excuses to have his shirts mended even when they barely needed a stitch. Harrison dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the packed earth. He was tall, lean in the way men became when they spent their lives working cattle and sleeping under stars. His face was tanned and lined at the corners of his eyes from squinting into the sun, but there was a gentleness there that most cowboys lacked. He stepped closer to her, close enough that she could smell leather and sage and something distinctly him. "Not goodbye," he said firmly, reaching out to tuck a strand of her dark hair behind her ear. His calloused fingers lingered against her cheek. "Just see you soon. I will come back, Amelia. I give you my word on that." "You are riding into the mountains to track rustlers who have already killed 2 men, she replied, her brown eyes searching his face. "How can you promise something like that when you do not know what will happen?" "Because I have something worth coming back to now," Harrison said simply. "6 months ago I was just drifting, working whatever ranch would hire me, never staying anywhere long. Then I met you, and suddenly this dusty little town felt like home. So no, this is not goodbye. This is me telling you to keep that red dress you are working on ready, because when I get back, I am going to take you to the dance at the community hall, and I am going to make sure everyone in White Pine knows you are spoken for." Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes, but she blinked them back. "You are terribly presumptuous, Harrison York. I never said I was spoken for." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth, the first genuine smile she had seen from him all morning. "Are you saying you are not?" She looked down at her hands, at the calluses on her fingers from endless hours of needlework. When she looked back up at him, she let him see the truth in her eyes. "I am saying you had better come back to find out." Harrison pulled her close then, right there at the edge of town where anyone could see, and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart ache. It was not their first kiss, but it felt like a promise, like he was pouring every intention he had into that single moment. When he finally pulled back, he pressed his forehead against hers. 2 weeks, he said. 3 at the most. The sheriff thinks the rustlers have a camp up near the Ruby Mountains. Once we find them and either run them off or bring them in, I will be back. Will you wait for me?" "I will wait," Amelia whispered. "But Harrison, please be careful. I could not bear it if something happened to you." "I will be careful," he promised. "I have too much to lose now to be reckless." He mounted his horse again, settling into the saddle with practiced ease. The sun was climbing higher now, and the day was already growing hot. 4 other riders waited for him about 100 yards away, including Sheriff Thomas Morrison, and 3 other ranch hands who had volunteered to track down the men who had been stealing cattle from the ranches around White Pine for the past 2 months. The rustlers had grown bolder, killing the 2 men who had tried to stop them during their last raid, and the community had decided it was time to put an end to it. Amelia watched as Harrison rode toward the other men, her hand lifted in a small wave. He turned in his saddle once to look back at her, touching the brim of his hat in farewell. And then they were riding east toward the mountains, 5 dark figures against the pale landscape. She stood there until they disappeared completely, until even the dust from their horses had settled. And then she turned back toward town with a heavy heart. White Pine was not much to look at, just a collection of wooden buildings clustered around a main street, but it had a stubborn vitality to it. The silver mine that had given birth to the town was still producing, though not as richly as it had 5 years earlier, and the ranches in the surrounding valleys kept enough commerce flowing to support the general store, the saloon, the church, and the handful of other businesses that made up the town. Amelia's dress shop was in a small building next to the boarding house where she rented a room, and she spent her days there sewing dresses and mending clothes for the townspeople. When she returned to her shop that morning, her friend Clara Bennett was already there, sweeping the floor. Clara was the blacksmith's daughter, a cheerful woman of 25 with blonde hair and an infectious laugh. She looked up as Amelia entered, her expression sympathetic. "They rode out then?" Clara asked. Amelia nodded, untying her bonnet and hanging it on the peg by the door. "Just now. Harrison says he will be back in 2 or 3 weeks. He will come back," Clara said confidently. "Harrison York is one of the most capable men in this territory. My father says he has seen him handle a rifle, and there is nobody better. Besides, the sheriff would not have asked him to come along if he did not think Harrison could handle himself." "I know," Amelia said, moving to the work table where the red dress Harrison had mentioned lay partially finished. She had been making it for herself, a luxury she rarely allowed, using fabric she had traded for with a traveling merchant. The color was bold, brighter than anything she usually wore, but something about it had called to her. Now she was glad she had started it. It gave her something to focus on, something to work toward. "I just worry. Those men have already killed twice. What is to stop them from killing again?" "Nothing," Clara said honestly, "but worrying yourself sick will not change anything. Harrison knows what he is doing, and he has 4 other good men with him. They will find those rustlers, and they will either capture them or chase them clear out of Nevada. Either way, our boys will come home." Amelia picked up her needle and thread, trying to lose herself in the familiar rhythm of stitching. Clara was right, of course. Worrying would not help anyone. But as she worked, her mind kept drifting back to Harrison, to the way he had looked at her, to the promise in his voice when he said he would return. She had not expected to fall in love when she came to White Pine. She had not been looking for it, had not particularly wanted it. But somehow Harrison had slipped past her defenses with his quiet strength and his gentle manner, and now she could not imagine her life without him in it. The days that followed were some of the longest of Amelia's life. She threw herself into her work, taking on extra projects and spending long hours at her sewing machine. She finished the red dress and started on an order for the banker's wife, a complicated gown with dozens of tiny buttons and intricate lacework. When she was not working, she helped Clara at her father's blacksmith shop, or she visited with some of the other women in town, or she read by lamplight in her small room at the boarding house. But no matter how busy she kept herself, she could not stop thinking about Harrison. News from the Ruby Mountains was scarce. The general store owner reported that a supply wagon heading that direction had seen the sheriff's group about 3 days out, but that was all anyone knew. The days stretched into a week, then 2 weeks, then into the 3rd week, and still there was no word. Amelia tried to keep her spirits up, but she could feel the worry gnawing at her, a constant presence in the back of her mind. It was on a Thursday afternoon, 20 days after Harrison had ridden out of town, that Martha Reynolds came rushing into the dress shop with news. Martha was the doctor's wife, a sensible woman in her 50s who rarely got excited about anything, so when she burst through the door with her face flushed and her bonnet askew, Amelia immediately set down her work. "They are back," Martha announced breathlessly. "The sheriff and his men. They just rode into town. My husband is at the saloon now checking them over for injuries." Amelia's heart leaped into her throat. "Are they all right? Is anyone hurt?" "I do not know the details," Martha admitted. "I just saw them riding in and came straight here. I knew you would want to know." Amelia did not even bother to put on her bonnet. She simply rushed out the door and down the street toward the saloon, her skirts gathered in her hands. The main street of White Pine was busier than usual, with people gathering to hear what had happened. When Amelia pushed through the crowd and into the saloon, she saw Sheriff Morrison sitting at a table with a bandage around his arm, looking tired but unharmed. 2 other men from the group were there as well, drinking water and talking to the small crowd that had gathered. But Harrison was not among them. Amelia felt her stomach drop. "Where is Harrison?" she asked, her voice cutting through the chatter. Sheriff Morrison looked up at her, and she saw exhaustion in his eyes but also something that might have been understanding. "He is all right," the sheriff said quickly, seeing the panic on her face. "He took a bullet in the shoulder 3 days ago, but he is fine. Doc Reynolds is tending to him in the back room right now." Without waiting to hear more, Amelia pushed through to the back of the saloon, where there was a small room the doctor sometimes used for emergencies. She knocked once, and then opened the door without waiting for an answer. Inside, Harrison sat on a wooden chair with his shirt off, his left shoulder wrapped in clean white bandages. Dr. Reynolds was just finishing up, tying off the last of the wrapping, and he looked up with a frown when Amelia entered. "This is highly improper," the doctor began, but Harrison cut him off. "It is fine, Doc," Harrison said, his eyes locked on Amelia. "Give us a minute, will you?" Dr. Reynolds muttered something about propriety but gathered his supplies and left the room, closing the door behind him. For a long moment, Amelia and Harrison just looked at each other. He looked thinner than he had 3 weeks ago, his face more drawn, and there were shadows under his eyes that spoke of hard travel and little sleep. But he was alive, and he was here, and that was all that mattered. "You got shot," Amelia said, her voice shaking. "Just grazed, really," Harrison said, trying to make light of it. "The bullet went clean through. Doc says I will be fine in a couple of weeks." Amelia crossed the room in 3 quick steps, and before she could think better of it, slapped him across the face. Not hard enough to really hurt, but hard enough to make her point. Harrison looked startled, his hand coming up to his cheek. "What was that for?" "For making me worry," Amelia said, and then she started to cry, all the fear and tension of the past 3 weeks pouring out of her. "For getting shot. For being gone so long. For making me care about you so much that the thought of losing you made me feel like I could not breathe." Harrison stood up carefully, favoring his injured shoulder, and pulled her into his arms with his good arm. She pressed her face against his bare chest, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart under her cheek. He smelled like trail dust and sweat and blood, but she did not care. He was alive and he was here, and that was everything. "I am sorry," Harrison murmured into her hair. "I am so sorry I worried you, but I told you I would come back, and I did. I will always come back to you, Amelia. Always." She pulled back just enough to look up at him, tears still streaming down her face. "What happened out there?" Harrison sighed, his hand coming up to cup her face. "We tracked the rustlers to their camp in the mountains. There were 6 of them, and they did not want to come quietly. There was a fight. Sheriff Morrison got winged in the arm and I took a bullet in the shoulder, but we got them all in the end. 3 are dead, 3 are in custody and will be transported to the territorial prison. The cattle they stole have been returned to their rightful owners. It is over. You could have been killed, Amelia whispered. But I was not, Harrison said firmly. And do you know what kept me going through all of it? Thinking about you, about that promise I made to take you to the dance in your red dress. That was what made me careful, what made me stay focused. I had something to come back to, and that made all the difference. Amelia reached up and touched his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. I love you, she said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. I know it has only been a few months, and I know it might be too soon to say it, but I do. I love you, Harrison York, and if you ever scare me like this again, I will do more than just slap you. Harrison laughed, a real laugh that made his eyes crinkle at the corners. I love you too, Amelia Carson. I have loved you since the first time I saw you, standing in front of your dress shop with pins in your mouth and fabric draped over your arm, looking like you had taken on the whole world and intended to win. You are the strongest, most beautiful woman I have ever met, and I want to spend the rest of my life proving to you that I am worth the trouble. He kissed her then, and it was different from the kiss at the town limits 3 weeks ago. That kiss had been a promise. This one was a homecoming, a celebration, a claim. When they finally broke apart, both of them were breathing hard, and Amelia could see the desire in his eyes matching her own. Marry me, Harrison said suddenly. I know I do not have much. I have been saving up to buy my own piece of land, and I have enough now for a small ranch with some cattle. It will not be easy at first, but I will work hard and I will build us a good life. Say yes, Amelia. Say you will be my wife. Amelia felt fresh tears spring to her eyes, but these were tears of joy. Yes, she said without hesitation. Yes, I will marry you. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity. Harrison recovered from his shoulder wound quickly, though Amelia fussed over him more than he probably needed. They announced their engagement, and the whole town of White Pine seemed to rejoice with them. Clara immediately volunteered to help with the wedding preparations, and Martha Reynolds offered her home for the reception. Amelia threw herself into making her wedding dress, a beautiful creation of white silk and lace that she worked on late into the night. Harrison spent his time finalizing the purchase of a piece of land about 5 miles outside of town, in a valley with good water and grazing land. He had been saving for years for this opportunity, and now that he had found Amelia, he had the motivation to make it succeed. He hired a few men to help him start building a house, something small but sturdy, with room to expand as their family grew. Every evening, he would ride into town covered in sawdust and dirt, and he would find Amelia at her shop or at the boarding house, and they would sit together and talk about their future. I was thinking we could get some chickens, Amelia said one evening as they sat on the porch of the boarding house, watching the sun set over the mountains. I have always wanted chickens, and maybe a vegetable garden near the house. Chickens and a garden, Harrison agreed, his arm around her shoulders. We will need both, and I am thinking of starting with about 20 head of cattle, maybe more if the price is right. It will not make us rich, but it will be a start. I do not need to be rich, Amelia said softly. I just need you and a place we can call our own and maybe someday a family to fill it. Harrison turned to look at her, his eyes serious. How many children do you want? Amelia laughed. I have not really thought about it in numbers. A few, I suppose. Enough to make the house feel full and happy. What about you? As many as you are willing to give me, Harrison said. I grew up as an only child and I always wished I had brothers and sisters. I want our children to have that, to have each other. They were married on a clear Saturday morning in September at the White Pine Community Church. The whole town turned out for the wedding, packing the small church to overflowing. Amelia wore her white silk dress and carried a bouquet of wildflowers that Clara had picked that morning. Harrison wore his best suit, his hair freshly cut, and when Amelia walked down the aisle on the arm of the boarding house owner, Mr. Patterson, who had agreed to stand in for her father, she saw Harrison's eyes shine with unshed tears. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. Reverend Mitchell spoke about love and commitment and the sanctity of marriage, and when it came time for the vows, Harrison's voice was steady and sure. I, Harrison York, take you, Amelia Carson, to be my lawfully wedded wife. I promise to love you, to honor you, to protect you and provide for you all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful to you, to stand by you in good times and bad, and to build with you a home filled with love and laughter and faith. This I swear before God and all these witnesses. Amelia's voice trembled slightly as she spoke her own vows, but the emotion behind them was unmistakable. I, Amelia Carson, take you, Harrison York, to be my lawfully wedded husband. I promise to love you, to honor you, to support you, and stand beside you all the days of my life. I promise to be faithful to you, to be your partner and your friend, and to build with you a home filled with love and laughter and faith. This I swear before God and all these witnesses. When Reverend Mitchell pronounced them husband and wife, and told Harrison he could kiss his bride, the kiss they shared was sweet and chaste, appropriate for the church setting, but Amelia could feel the promise of more in the way his lips lingered on hers. The congregation cheered, and then they were walking back down the aisle together, hand in hand, husband and wife. The reception at the Reynolds house was a joyful affair. There was food and music and dancing, and Amelia finally got to wear her red dress as she and Harrison danced together while the small band played. Harrison held her close, his injured shoulder healed enough now that he could move freely, and he whispered in her ear about all the things he wanted to do with her once they were alone. "You are terrible," Amelia said, but she was smiling. "We are in public." "Not for much longer," Harrison replied. "Another hour and I am taking you home, Mrs. York." The way he said her new name sent a shiver through her. She was Amelia York now, no longer Carson. She had a husband, and soon she would have a home, a real home of her own. It still felt like a dream, like something that could not possibly be real. But it was real. When they finally left the reception amid a shower of rice and good wishes, Harrison lifted her up onto the wagon he had borrowed for the occasion and climbed up beside her. They rode out of White Pine as the sun was setting, heading toward the small ranch that would be their new home. The house was not quite finished yet, but it was livable, with a bedroom and a main room that served as both kitchen and living space, and a loft that would eventually be used for storage or extra sleeping space. Harrison carried Amelia over the threshold, a tradition she had heard about but never expected to experience herself. He set her down gently in the middle of the main room, and she looked around at the simple furnishings, the wood stove, the table and chairs, the bed visible through the open door to the bedroom. It was plain and rough around the edges, but it was theirs, and that made it beautiful. "Welcome home, Amelia," Harrison said softly. She turned to him, reaching up to frame his face with her hands. "Welcome home, husband." They came together in a rush of need and desire that had been building for months. Harrison kissed her deeply, his hands in her hair, on her waist, everywhere at once. Amelia responded with equal fervor, her fingers working at the buttons of his shirt while he struggled with the laces of her dress. They stumbled toward the bedroom, shedding clothes as they went, and when they finally fell into bed together, the world outside ceased to exist. There was only the two of them, skin against skin, hearts beating in tandem, two people becoming one in the most fundamental way. Afterward, they lay tangled in the sheets, Amelia's head on Harrison's chest, his fingers trailing lazy patterns on her bare shoulder. The room was dark except for the moonlight streaming through the window, and the only sounds were their breathing and the distant call of a coyote somewhere in the hills. "Are you happy?" Harrison asked quietly. Amelia propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "I am more than happy. I am complete. I did not even realize there was a piece of me missing until I found you, and now I cannot imagine being without you." Harrison pulled her down for a tender kiss. "I will spend every day trying to make you this happy." "You already do," Amelia assured him, "just by being you." The first months of their marriage were filled with hard work and simple joys. Harrison worked from sunrise to sunset building up the ranch, repairing fences, caring for the cattle he had purchased, and finishing the house. Amelia kept her dress shop in town, riding into White Pine 3 days a week to work and returning to the ranch the other days. She also threw herself into making their house a home, sewing curtains for the windows, planting her garden, and learning to cook on the temperamental wood stove. They learned each other's rhythms and habits, the little things that made them each unique. Amelia discovered that Harrison sang when he worked, usually off-key but with great enthusiasm, and that he had a terrible sweet tooth that she could exploit when she wanted him to do something. Harrison learned that Amelia talked in her sleep, usually about mundane things like fabric orders or chicken feed, and that she was grumpy in the mornings until she had her first cup of coffee. They also learned how to fight and make up. Their first real argument came about 2 months after the wedding, when Harrison made plans to sell some cattle without consulting Amelia first. She had been furious, accusing him of treating her like a child instead of a partner. Harrison had been defensive at first, arguing that he was the one who understood cattle and ranching, but when he saw how hurt Amelia was, he had backed down and apologized. "You are right," he had said. "This ranch belongs to both of us, and I should have talked to you before making a decision. I am sorry. It will not happen again." And it had not. From that point on, they made decisions together, talking through the big things and the small things, building their partnership along with their ranch. Amelia found she had a good head for numbers, and took over managing their finances, while Harrison focused on the physical work of running the ranch. Winter came early that year, with snow falling in late October and temperatures dropping well below freezing. They spent long evenings huddled close to the stove, reading or talking or simply enjoying each other's company. On the coldest nights, Harrison would hold Amelia close in bed, their bodies pressed together for warmth, and he would tell her stories about his childhood in Texas, about the places he had been and the things he had seen before coming to Nevada. In turn, Amelia told him about growing up in St. Louis, about her mother who had died when she was 12, about her father who had been a good man but a poor businessman, leaving her with nothing when he passed. She told him about the fear she had felt coming west alone, about the determination that had driven her to make a new life for herself in a strange place. "I am glad you came west," Harrison said one night as they lay in bed listening to the wind howl outside. "I am glad you were brave enough to leave everything you knew and start over. Otherwise, we never would have found each other." "I am glad, too," Amelia whispered. "Even when I was scared, even when I was lonely, something kept pushing me forward. Maybe it was fate. Maybe I was always meant to end up here with you." "I like to think so," Harrison said. "I like to think that every choice I made, every place I drifted to, was leading me here to White Pine, to you." As winter turned to spring and the snow melted from the high meadows, Amelia began to suspect that she might be pregnant. Her monthly courses had stopped, and she was tired all the time, and certain smells made her feel queasy. She waited another month to be sure before telling Harrison, wanting to be certain before she raised his hopes. On a warm evening in April, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, she finally told him, "Harrison, I have some news." He looked at her curiously. "Good news or bad news?" "Good news," she said, reaching for his hand. "I am with child. We are going to have a baby." For a moment Harrison just stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then a huge grin spread across his face, and he let out a whoop of joy that probably carried all the way to White Pine. He picked Amelia up and spun her around, laughing like a boy. "Careful," Amelia protested, but she was laughing too. "You are going to make me dizzy." Harrison set her down gently, his hands on her shoulders, his eyes shining. "A baby. We are going to have a baby." "When?" "I think around October or November," Amelia said. "I am not entirely sure, but that seems about right." "October or November," Harrison repeated, as if committing it to memory. "That gives us time to prepare. We will need to add another room to the house, and we will need a cradle, and you are going to need to take it easy. No more riding into town 3 days a week. I will take over your deliveries." Amelia started to protest, but Harrison shook his head firmly. "I am serious, Amelia. You are carrying our child. I am not going to risk anything happening to you or the baby because you were stubborn about working." "I am not going to break just because I am pregnant," Amelia said. "Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. I can still work, just maybe not quite as hard." They compromised. Amelia would cut back her hours at the shop but would still go into town twice a week to work on orders and visit with friends. The other days, she would work from home, sewing and preparing for the baby. Harrison hired a young man named Peter Sullivan to help with the ranch work, which freed up more of his time to work on expanding the house. The summer passed in a haze of heat and anticipation. Amelia's belly grew round and prominent, and she felt the baby move inside her for the first time in early July, a flutter like butterfly wings against her ribs. She immediately called for Harrison, placing his hand on her belly so he could feel it too. When the baby kicked against his palm, Harrison's face lit up with wonder. "That is our child," he whispered. "Our baby right there inside you. It is a miracle, Amelia." "It really is," she agreed, covering his hand with hers. As fall approached, Amelia found herself getting more nervous about the birth. She had heard stories, of course, about the pain and the danger, about women who did not survive childbirth. Dr. Reynolds assured her that she was healthy and strong and that he expected no complications, but still she worried. Harrison seemed to sense her fear, and he made a point of holding her each night and reminding her that she was brave and capable and that she could do this. "I will be right there with you," he promised. "Every moment. You will not go through this alone." "Men do not usually stay in the room during childbirth," Amelia said. "I do not care what men usually do," Harrison replied firmly. "You are my wife, and that is my child you are bringing into the world. I am going to be there to support you, no matter what anyone says about propriety." The baby came early, on a cold night in late October when the first snow of the season was falling outside. Amelia woke Harrison in the middle of the night, her face pale and her hand clutching her swollen belly. "It is time," she said. "The baby is coming." Harrison was dressed and out the door in minutes, riding hard for town to fetch Dr. Reynolds. The doctor arrived within an hour, his medical bag in hand, and he immediately took charge of the situation. Martha Reynolds came with him to assist, and she shooed Harrison out of the bedroom despite his protests. "Let the doctor work," Martha said firmly. You can see your wife when the baby is born." But Amelia called for him, her voice strained with pain. "Harrison, I want Harrison here." Dr. Reynolds looked like he wanted to argue, but Martha just shrugged. "If the mother wants him here, he stays." So Harrison stayed, holding Amelia's hand through the long hours of labor, wiping the sweat from her forehead, murmuring encouragement when she was sure she could not go on. He had seen cattle giving birth, had helped with difficult calvings, but nothing had prepared him for watching Amelia go through this. She was so strong, so fierce, even as she cried out in pain and squeezed his hand hard enough to bruise. Finally, as dawn was breaking outside, the baby came into the world with a lusty cry. Dr. Reynolds caught the infant and held it up, and Harrison saw that they had a son, red-faced and squalling and absolutely perfect. "A boy," the doctor announced, handing the baby to Martha to clean. "You have a healthy baby boy." Amelia collapsed back against the pillows, exhausted but smiling. Harrison leaned down to kiss her forehead, his own cheeks wet with tears. "You did it. You were amazing. I love you so much." "I love you too," Amelia whispered. "Is he all right?" "The baby, is he all right?" "He is perfect," Martha said, bringing the now clean and swaddled infant over to Amelia. 10 fingers, 10 toes, and a good strong cry. "Here, Mama, meet your son." Amelia took the baby in her arms, and Harrison sat on the edge of the bed beside her, looking down at the tiny face of their child. The baby had stopped crying and was looking up at them with dark, unfocused eyes, and Harrison felt something shift in his chest, a fierce protectiveness and love that he had never experienced before. "He is beautiful," Harrison said softly. "He looks like you." "He has your nose," Amelia said, touching the baby's tiny face. "What should we name him?" They had discussed names, of course, but had not settled on anything definite. Now, looking at their son, Harrison said, "What about Henry, after your father?" Amelia's eyes filled with tears. Her father's name had been Henry, and the thought that Harrison remembered and wanted to honor him touched her deeply. "Henry York. I love it. Welcome to the world, Henry." Dr. Reynolds finished his examination of both mother and baby, declared them both healthy, and then left with Martha, promising to check back in a few days. Alone with his new family, Harrison stretched out on the bed next to Amelia, his arm around her shoulders, and together they watched their son sleep. "We made a person," Amelia said in wonder. "An actual person who will grow up and have his own thoughts and his own life. It is incredible." "You made him," Harrison corrected. "I just helped a little at the beginning. You are the one who carried him and brought him into the world. You are amazing, Amelia." The weeks and months that followed were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Henry was a good baby, sleeping for a few hours at a stretch and nursing well. But still, the constant demands of caring for an infant left both Harrison and Amelia sleep-deprived and frazzled. Harrison hired Peter's younger sister, Emma Sullivan, to help Amelia with the housework and with the baby a few hours each day, which gave Amelia time to rest and to get back to her sewing. Slowly, they found their rhythm as parents. Harrison would wake in the night when Henry cried and bring him to Amelia to nurse, then walk him around the room until he fell back asleep. During the day, when weather permitted, Harrison would take Henry out to the barn in a sling Amelia had sewn, letting the baby watch as he worked with the cattle and the horses. Amelia would sing to Henry as she sewed, old lullabies her mother had sung to her, and she would tell him stories about his grandparents and about the world he had been born into. As Henry grew, his personality began to emerge. He was a serious baby, rarely crying without good reason, but he was also curious, his dark eyes following everything and everyone around him. By the time he was 6 months old, He was sitting up on his own and babbling constantly. By his first birthday, he was walking and getting into everything, and Harrison had to install a gate to keep him from wandering out of the house and toward the barn. Life on the ranch settled into a comfortable pattern. The cattle business was doing well enough to support them, and Amelia's sewing brought in additional income. They were not wealthy by any means, but they had enough, and they were happy. Harrison expanded the house again, adding a proper kitchen and a second bedroom for Henry, though the boy still slept in a cradle in their room for now. 2 years after Henry was born, Amelia found herself pregnant again. This time, she was less nervous about the birth, knowing what to expect. Harrison was just as protective as he had been the first time, insisting that she rest more and work less. But Amelia had learned how to manage his worrying and her own need to stay productive. Their daughter was born in the spring, on a mild day when the wildflowers were blooming across the valley. The labor was shorter and easier than it had been with Henry, and when Dr. Reynolds placed the baby girl in Amelia's arms, she felt a surge of love just as powerful as she had felt for her son. "What about Alice?" Harrison suggested, looking down at his daughter's tiny face. "Alice Marie York." "Alice Marie," Amelia repeated. "It is perfect. Hello, Alice. Welcome to the family." Henry, now 2 years old, was fascinated by his baby sister. He wanted to hold her constantly, though he was still too small to do so without help, and he would pat her head gently and tell her about his day in his toddler babble. Alice was a more demanding baby than Henry had been, crying more frequently and sleeping less. But she was also more social, smiling at everyone and cooing happily when someone paid attention to her. Over the next few years, the York family grew and thrived. Harrison and Peter expanded the cattle operation, and they bought more land adjacent to their original property, doubling the size of the ranch. Amelia opened a second dress shop in a larger town about 20 miles from White Pine, hiring a young seamstress to run it while she focused on design and on the more intricate pieces. The extra income allowed them to make more improvements to the house, including a proper second story with 3 bedrooms and a nice front porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the children play. When Henry was 5 and Alice was 3, Amelia became pregnant for a third time. This pregnancy was more difficult than the first 2, and she was sick more often and more tired. Dr. Reynolds warned her to take it easy, and Harrison practically forced her to bed rest for the last 2 months. But when their second son was born in the winter, healthy and strong, it was all worth it. They named him William, after Harrison's father, and he was a perfect blend of his parents, with Amelia's dark hair and Harrison's blue eyes. William was an easy baby, sleeping through the night almost from the beginning and rarely fussing, and Henry and Alice both adored him, fighting over who got to help take care of him. As the children grew, Harrison taught them about the ranch, about caring for animals and working the land. Henry took to it naturally, following his father everywhere and asking endless questions about cattle and horses and the business of ranching. Alice was more interested in her mother's work, learning to sew and to help in the garden, but she also had a fearless streak that often got her into trouble. More than once, Harrison had to rescue her from the top of a barn beam or from the back of a half-wild horse she had decided to try to ride. William was still too young to show much interest in anything beyond playing with his siblings and eating as much as possible. The years passed quickly, marked by the changing seasons and the steady rhythms of ranch life. White Pine grew slowly, adding a school and a new church and a hotel for travelers. Harrison became a respected member of the community, serving on the town council and helping to organize events and improvements. Amelia's dress business continued to thrive, and she became known throughout the territory for her skill with a needle. But through all the changes and all the growth, the core of their life remained the same. Every evening when the work was done and the children were in bed, Harrison and Amelia would sit together on their porch, watching the stars come out over the mountains. Sometimes they would talk about the day, about the children, about their plans for the future. Other times they would just sit in comfortable silence, content to be in each other's presence. One evening, when they had been married for 12 years, and Henry was preparing to start working on the ranch full-time, Amelia turned to Harrison with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about that day at the town limits?" she asked. "When you rode off to chase those rustlers and I thought I might never see you again." Harrison took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I think about it sometimes. I think about how scared I was that I might not make it back to you. That is when I knew for certain that I loved you, when the thought of not seeing you again was worse than the thought of facing down armed men." "You told me it was not goodbye, just see you soon," Amelia said. "You were so confident, so sure. Were you really that certain you would come back?" Harrison was quiet for a moment, considering. "Honestly, no, I was not certain at all, but I wanted to be for your sake. I wanted you to believe I would come back because I needed you to wait for me, and I think saying it out loud made me more determined to make it true. I could not let those be my last words to you and then not come back. I would have waited," Amelia said softly. "Even if it had taken years, I would have waited for you." "I know," Harrison said, bringing her hand to his lips, "and that knowledge kept me going through some very dark moments." "You are my anchor, Amelia. You and our children. You are everything." "You are everything to me too," Amelia replied. "I never imagined when I came to White Pine that I would find this. A husband who loves me, children who fill my life with joy, a home that is truly mine. I feel like the luckiest woman in the world." They sat in silence for a while longer, watching the sky darken and the stars multiply. In the distance, they could hear Henry and Alice laughing about something, and the sound of William singing off-key as he got ready for bed. The cattle lowed softly in the fields, and a cool breeze carried the scent of sage and grass. "What do you think our grandchildren will be like?" Amelia asked suddenly. Harrison laughed. "Grandchildren? Henry is only 12. We have a long time before we need to worry about grandchildren." "I know, but still. Do you think about it? About the future, about what this ranch and this family will become?" "I think about it," Harrison admitted. "I think about Henry taking over the ranch someday, about Alice maybe opening her own dress shop or marrying someone who deserves her. I think about William and whoever he becomes. I think about us growing old together, sitting on this porch when we are gray and bent, watching our grandchildren play in the yard." "That sounds perfect," Amelia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. "That sounds like exactly the life I want." As the years continued to unfold, their vision of the future began to take shape. Henry grew into a capable young man, tall and strong like his father, with a natural gift for working with cattle and horses. At 18, he started courting the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Sarah with red hair and freckles. They were married when Henry was 20, in a ceremony that reminded Harrison and Amelia of their own wedding years earlier. Alice proved to be just as headstrong and independent as they had expected. She refused several marriage proposals, declaring that she was not ready to settle down yet, and instead convinced her parents to let her travel to San Francisco for a year to study design and business. When she returned, she opened her own shop in a town on the other side of the territory, and within 2 years it was the most successful dress shop in the region. She eventually married a lawyer named Thomas, a quiet, thoughtful man who clearly adored her, and they had 3 daughters who were as spirited as their mother. William turned out to be the scholar of the family. He loved books and learning, and when he was 16, he announced that he wanted to go east to attend university. Harrison and Amelia had mixed feelings about this, not wanting to see their youngest child go so far away, but they also wanted to support his dreams. They saved carefully, and when William was 18, they sent him to Boston to study law. He came home for visits when he could, and he wrote long letters about his experiences, about the bustling city and the different way of life there. Through it all, Harrison and Amelia remained each other's constant. They worked side by side, building their ranch and their family, supporting each other through challenges and celebrating successes together. They had their disagreements, of course, moments of frustration or miscommunication, but they had learned long ago how to talk through problems and find solutions together. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Harrison surprised Amelia with a trip to San Francisco. They left the ranch in Henry's capable hands and took the train west, spending a week exploring the city and enjoying time alone together. They ate in fancy restaurants and visited museums and theaters, and they stayed in a hotel with real wallpaper and gas lighting. It was a world away from their simple ranch life, exciting and novel, but by the end of the week, they were both ready to go home. "As nice as this has been," Amelia said as they stood on the train platform waiting to depart, "I miss our home. I miss the quiet and the open sky and knowing everyone we meet. I miss our life." "I miss it too," Harrison agreed, his arm around her waist. "But I am glad we came. It is good to remember that there is a whole world out there, even if our piece of it is the best part." When they returned to the ranch, they found that Henry and Sarah had news. Sarah was pregnant, and in the spring, Harrison and Amelia would become grandparents for the first time. The news filled them both with excitement and a strange sort of nostalgia, remembering when they had been the young couple expecting their first child. The baby, a boy they named James after Sarah's father, was born in April on a day that felt like the whole world was celebrating with them. The flowers were in bloom, the cattle were thriving, and the sun was shining bright and warm. When Harrison held his grandson for the first time, he felt tears prick at his eyes, overwhelmed by the continuation of their family, by the legacy he and Amelia had built. As the years passed, more grandchildren came. Henry and Sarah had 3 sons in total. Alice and Thomas had their 3 daughters. William eventually returned from Boston with a wife named Elizabeth, a fellow lawyer, and they settled in a city in California but visited regularly. They had twin boys who were as mischievous as William had been serious. Harrison and Amelia found their days filled with visits from their children and grandchildren, with helping Henry run the ranch, with community events and church functions, and with the quiet pleasure of each other's company. They were growing older now, their hair gray and their bodies not quite as strong as they once were, but their love for each other had only deepened with time. On a warm summer evening, when Harrison was 60 and Amelia was 58, they sat together on the porch as they had done countless times before. Henry and Sarah lived in the main house now, having taken over most of the daily operations of the ranch, while Harrison and Amelia had moved into a smaller house that Harrison had built on the property specifically for their retirement. It was cozy and comfortable, with large windows that looked out over the valley they had called home for so many years. "You remember," Amelia said, her hand in Harrison's, "when you told me at the town limits that it was not goodbye, just see you soon." "I remember," Harrison said, his thumb rubbing circles on the back of her hand. "I remember everything about that day. You were wearing your blue dress with the white collar and you had your hair pinned up the way I always liked. You looked beautiful and sad, and I wanted nothing more than to stay right there with you instead of riding off into danger. I was so afraid, Amelia confessed. I thought I was going to lose you before I even really had you, but you kept your promise. You came back, and you have been coming back to me every day since then. I will always come back to you, Harrison said, the same words he had spoken so many years ago. In this life and whatever comes after, I will always find my way back to you. Amelia leaned against him, and they watched as the sun set over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink and purple. In the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their shouts and laughter carrying on the evening breeze. Somewhere closer, a horse whinnied and cattle lowed, the familiar sounds of ranch life that had been the soundtrack to their years together. We built a good life, Amelia said quietly. Better than I ever dreamed was possible. We have children who are happy and successful, grandchildren who are healthy and loved, a ranch that will support our family for generations. And most importantly, we have each other. After all these years, that is still the best part. That will always be the best part, Harrison agreed. Everything else, the ranch, the success, even the children and grandchildren as much as I love them, all of that is secondary to you. You are the center of my world, Amelia. You always have been, from that first day I saw you standing in front of your shop. You always will be. They sat in comfortable silence as the stars began to appear overhead. The same stars that had shone down on them on their wedding night, on the nights when their children were born, on countless evenings throughout their long and happy marriage. The air was cool but not cold, carrying the scent of the earth and the promise of another good year ahead. Inside the main house, they could see lights coming on as Sarah prepared dinner, and Henry helped wrangle the grandchildren. The sight of it, the warmth and life and continuity of it, filled Harrison with a deep sense of satisfaction. This was what he had worked for, what they had built together. A family, a home, a legacy of love and hard work that would continue long after they were gone. I love you, Harrison said, not for the first time and certainly not for the last. I have loved you from the moment I first saw you, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond. I love you too, Amelia replied, tilting her face up to kiss him softly. Thank you for not saying goodbye all those years ago. Thank you for coming back to me. Thank you for this life we have built together. Thank you for waiting, Harrison said. Thank you for taking a chance on a drifting cowboy with nothing but a dream and a promise. Thank you for making me the happiest man alive. As darkness fell completely and the stars shone bright overhead, Harrison York and Amelia York sat together on their porch, their hands clasped and their hearts full. They had faced challenges and overcome obstacles, had built a ranch from nothing, had raised 3 children and welcomed 8 grandchildren into the world. They had laughed together and cried together, had worked side by side and dreamed together. They had created a life that was rich and full and meaningful, a life that had exceeded their wildest expectations. But at the core of all of it, beneath all the accomplishments and the family and the success, was the simple truth of 2 people who had found each other in an unlikely place and had chosen each other every single day since then. Harrison had promised her that day at the town limits that it was not goodbye, just see you soon. He had kept that promise for more than 40 years, through everything life had thrown at them, and he would keep it for however many years they had left. The wind picked up slightly, rustling through the grass and making the windmill creak in the distance. Harrison pulled a blanket around Amelia's shoulders, and she snuggled closer to him, perfectly content. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every day did on a working ranch. Their grandchildren would need attention. Henry would want to discuss plans for next year's cattle drive, and there would be 100 small tasks and decisions to be made. But for now, in this moment, there was nothing but peace and love and the deep satisfaction of a life well lived. As they finally stood to go inside for the night, Harrison paused at the door to look back over the valley one more time. The lights of White Pine glowed faintly in the distance, the town that had brought them together all those years ago. It was still there, still thriving in its modest way, and the thought pleased him. Everything had come full circle, from that day when he had ridden out of town wondering if he would survive to find his way back to Amelia, to now, when he could look around and see the fruits of their love and labor everywhere he turned. "Are you coming?" Amelia asked from inside, her voice warm and amused. "Just taking a moment," Harrison said, but he turned and went inside, closing the door behind him. The house was small but comfortable, filled with photographs of their family and mementos from their years together. The bed was warm and welcoming, and as they settled in for the night, Harrison pulled Amelia close, her back against his chest, his arm around her waist. "Good night, my love," he whispered into her hair. "Good night," Amelia murmured, already half asleep. As Harrison drifted off to sleep, his last thoughts were of gratitude. Gratitude for the life he had been given, for the woman who had chosen to share that life with him, for the family they had created, and for every precious moment they had spent together. He had been a wandering cowboy with no real direction or purpose, and then he had met Amelia, and suddenly everything had made sense. She had given him a home, not just a physical place, but a sense of belonging that he had never known before. And in return, he had given her his whole heart, his complete devotion, and a lifetime of love. The next morning dawned bright and clear, and life on the York ranch continued as it always did, with the rhythm and routine that comes from years of practice. Harrison helped Henry with some repairs to the barn, while Amelia spent time with her grandchildren, teaching the girls to sew and answering endless questions from the boys about everything and nothing. At lunch, the whole family gathered around the big table in the main house, and the noise and chaos of multiple conversations happening at once was music to both Harrison and Amelia's ears. In the afternoon, Harrison and Amelia took a walk together, something they tried to do every day when the weather permitted. They walked slowly now, their steps not as quick as they once were, but they still covered their favorite route, along the creek that ran through their property and up to the small rise where they could see most of their land spread out before them. "I never get tired of this view," Amelia said, shading her eyes against the sun. "Even after all these years, it still takes my breath away." "Mine too," Harrison agreed. "Every time I look at it, I remember what it looked like when we first bought it, just grass and rocks and potential. And look at it now. We did this, Amelia. We turned that potential into reality." "We did," Amelia said proudly, "and our children and grandchildren will carry it forward. That is what makes it all worthwhile, knowing that what we built will outlast us." They stood there for a long moment, taking in the view and the perfect weather and the simple joy of being together. Then Amelia turned to Harrison with a mischievous smile. "You think we are too old to dance?" she asked. Harrison laughed. "I do not know, probably." "Why?" "Because I just thought of something. You promised me that day at the town limits that you would take me dancing in my red dress when you got back, and you did at our wedding reception. But we have not gone dancing in years, so I was thinking maybe we should go to the next town dance. Show these young people how it is done." Harrison grinned, the same grin that had charmed Amelia 42 years earlier. "I think that is a wonderful idea, though I should warn you my knees are not what they used to be. I might step on your toes." "I will risk it," Amelia said, and she moved into his arms right there on the hillside. They swayed together to music only they could hear, the warm breeze ruffling their hair and the sun shining down on them. It was not the graceful dancing of their youth, but it was sweet and genuine, a physical expression of the love that had sustained them through decades of life together. When the next community dance came around 2 weeks later, Harrison and Amelia attended, and they did indeed dance together, much to the delight of the townspeople who had watched their love story unfold over the years. They became something of a local legend in White Pine, the seamstress and the cowboy who had built a life and a family on nothing but hard work and devotion. Young couples would sometimes ask them for advice, and Harrison and Amelia would always say the same thing. Choose each other every day, communicate honestly, work together toward shared goals, and never forget why you fell in love in the first place. The seasons continued their endless cycle, and Harrison and Amelia continued to fill their days with simple pleasures and family. They attended church every Sunday, sitting in the same pew they had sat in for decades. They hosted dinners and celebrations, their home always open to their children and grandchildren. They watched sunsets and sunrises, tended Amelia's garden together, and took care of the few tasks around their small house that needed doing. On their 50th wedding anniversary, their entire family gathered for a massive celebration. All 3 of their children were there with their spouses and children, and even some of the grandchildren had started bringing sweethearts to introduce to the family. The party lasted all day, with food and music and dancing and speeches. Henry gave a toast, thanking his parents for the example they had set and for the foundation they had built for the family. Alice read a poem she had written about her mother's strength and grace. William spoke about the lessons his father had taught him about integrity and hard work. But the most moving moment came at the end of the evening when Harrison stood up to speak. He was 70 now, his hair white and his face deeply lined, but his eyes were still sharp and his voice was still strong. 50 years, he began, looking at Amelia. 50 years ago today, I married the most remarkable woman I have ever known. I was a cowboy with a dream and not much else, and she took a chance on me. She built a home with me, raised children with me, created this entire life with me. People sometimes ask me what the secret is to a long and happy marriage, and the truth is, there is no secret. You just have to find the right person, and then you have to keep choosing them every single day, even when it is hard, especially when it is hard. Amelia is the right person for me. She always has been from the moment I first saw her. And I have chosen her every day for 50 years, and I will keep choosing her for however many days we have left. I love you, Amelia York. Thank you for 50 incredible years. Amelia was crying openly by the time he finished, and she stood up and went to him, not caring that everyone was watching. She wrapped her arms around him and held him tight, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. It was a perfect moment, a crystallization of everything they had built together, and neither of them would ever forget it. Life continued peacefully for several more years. Harrison's health remained good, though he moved a bit more slowly and took more naps than he used to. Amelia developed arthritis in her hands, which made sewing difficult, but she learned to adapt, doing smaller projects and focusing more on design than on the actual stitching. They talked often about the past, reminiscing about their courtship and early years of marriage, about the challenges they had faced and overcome, about the joys and sorrows that had shaped their lives. One quiet evening in the spring, when Harrison was 74 and Amelia was 72, they sat on their porch as always, watching the sun set. Harrison had been quieter than usual that day, and Amelia sensed something on his mind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, squeezing his hand. Harrison was quiet for a moment before answering. I was thinking about that day at the town limits when I rode away to chase those rustlers. I was thinking about how I told you it was not goodbye, just see you soon. And I was thinking about how that has been true our entire lives. Every time I've had to leave, whether it was for a cattle drive or a trip to another town or just going out to work in the fields, it has never been goodbye. It has always been see you soon, because I have always known I was coming back to you. And you always have, Amelia said softly. You have always come back to me. I always will, Harrison said. Even when I am gone, when this life is over, I will find a way back to you. I promise you that. Amelia felt tears prick at her eyes. Let us not talk about being gone. We have years left together yet. I hope so, Harrison said. I hope we have many more years. But whenever that time comes, for either of us, I want you to know that it will not be goodbye. It will just be see you soon. Because nothing, not even death, will keep me from you forever. They sat together in the gathering darkness, holding hands and watching the stars appear one by one in the vast Nevada sky. The life they had built together surrounded them, the ranch still thriving under Henry's management, their children and grandchildren happy and successful, their love as strong as it had ever been. They had started with nothing but a dream and a promise, and they had created something beautiful and lasting. The years that followed were gentle ones, filled with quiet joys and the peace that comes from a life well lived. Harrison and Amelia celebrated their 55th anniversary, then their 60th. They welcomed great-grandchildren into the world, tiny babies who represented the continuation of the legacy they had begun. They watched as White Pine continued to grow and change, as automobiles began to appear on the streets and electricity came to even the remote ranches. The world was changing rapidly, but some things remained constant: the love of family, the satisfaction of honest work, the beauty of the Nevada landscape, and the enduring bond between Harrison and Amelia York. As they approached their 65th wedding anniversary, Harrison's health began to decline. He had a series of small strokes that left him weaker and more confused at times. Amelia cared for him with the same devotion he had always shown her, never leaving his side, making sure he was comfortable and surrounded by love. Their children came to visit more frequently, and the small house was often filled with the voices of their descendants. On a warm evening in early September, just a few days before what would have been their 65th anniversary, Harrison lay in bed with Amelia beside him. The window was open, letting in the cool evening breeze and the sounds of the ranch that had been home for so many years. Henry sat in a chair in the corner, keeping watch, and the other children were on their way. Harrison's breathing was labored, but his mind was clear. He turned his head to look at Amelia, and he smiled, the same smile that had captured her heart so many decades earlier. "Not goodbye," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Just see you soon." Amelia pressed her lips to his forehead, tears streaming down her face. "See you soon, my love. I will be along before you know it." "Wait a while," Harrison said, his hand tightening slightly on hers. "Enjoy the grandchildren. Enjoy the life we built. But when it is time, I will be waiting for you, I promise." "I know you will," Amelia said. "You have never broken a promise to me. You are not going to start now." Harrison closed his eyes, still smiling, and his breathing gradually slowed. Amelia held his hand and talked to him softly, reminding him of their life together, of all the moments they had shared, of the love that had sustained them through everything. Henry called for the doctor, but they all knew there was nothing to be done. This was simply the natural end of a long and beautiful life. As the sun set completely, and the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Harrison York took his last breath, surrounded by the love of his wife and his son, in the home he had built with his own hands. And true to his word, it was not goodbye. It was just see you soon. Amelia lived for 3 more years after Harrison's death, years that she filled with her children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. She continued to live in the small house on the ranch, refusing all suggestions that she move in with one of her children. This was her home, the home she had shared with Harrison, and she wanted to stay there for as long as she could. She spent her days working in her garden, visiting with family, and telling stories about Harrison to anyone who would listen. She wanted to make sure that the younger generations knew what kind of man he had been, what kind of love they had shared. On a spring morning, just after her 80th birthday, Amelia woke feeling different. She could not quite put her finger on it, but there was a lightness to her that had not been there in a long time. She got dressed slowly, taking her time, and then she sat in her favorite chair by the window and looked out over the valley that had been her home for more than 60 years. She thought about Harrison, as she did every day, but today the grief that usually accompanied those thoughts was tempered by something else. Anticipation, maybe. A sense that he was close, that the see you soon he had promised was about to become a reality. She closed her eyes, letting the warm sunlight bathe her face, and she smiled. When Sarah came to check on her later that morning, bringing fresh bread and mail, she found Amelia still sitting in her chair by the window, that smile still on her face. She had passed peacefully in her sleep, and there was something about her expression that suggested she had been happy at the end, that she had been going toward something wonderful rather than away from something beloved. At Amelia's funeral, which was held at the White Pine Community Church, and attended by what seemed like half the territory, Henry spoke about his parents and the legacy they had left. He talked about their love story, about how his father had ridden off to face danger and had promised his mother it was not goodbye, just see you soon. He talked about how his father had kept that promise for 65 years, and how, in the end, his mother had gone to meet him so they could be together again. They taught us, Henry said, his voice thick with emotion, that real love is not just a feeling. It is a choice you make every single day. It is work and sacrifice and compromise and communication. But it is also joy and laughter and partnership and friendship. They built something beautiful together, and that beauty continues in all of us who are here today, in their children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They are both gone now, but they are not really gone. They live on in us, in the lessons they taught, and the example they set, and the love they gave so freely. Amelia was buried next to Harrison in the small cemetery outside White Pine, under a tree they had planted together years earlier. Their shared headstone was simple but meaningful. Harrison York, 1854–1928, and Amelia York, 1856–1936. Beloved husband and wife, father and mother, grandfather and grandmother. Not goodbye, just see you soon. The ranch continued to thrive under Henry's management and eventually under his son's. The dress shops that Amelia had started continued to operate, run by her granddaughters and great-granddaughters. The family stayed close, gathering for holidays and celebrations, always remembering the foundation that Harrison and Amelia had built for them. And on quiet evenings, when the work was done and the stars were coming out over the Nevada desert, members of the York family would sometimes sit on their porches and tell the story of how it all began, of the seamstress and the cowboy who met in a dusty mining town in 1878 and who built a love that lasted not just a lifetime but generations. They would talk about the day at the town limits, when Amelia said goodbye and Harrison said not goodbye, just see you soon. They would talk about the promise that was kept for 65 years and beyond, a promise that became the foundation of a family and a legacy that would continue for generations to come. It was a love story for the ages, simple yet profound, rooted in the harsh but beautiful landscape of the American West and in the enduring human capacity for devotion and partnership. It was a story about two people who found each other against the odds and who chose each other every single day until death parted them, and even then, only temporarily. It was a story that proved that some bonds are stronger than time, stronger than distance, stronger even than death itself. And somewhere, in whatever comes after this life, Harrison York waited for Amelia York with open arms, ready to begin the next chapter of their eternal love story. Because he had promised her it was not goodbye, just see you soon. And Harrison York always kept his promises.